panel discussion, which is hosted by the Research Capacity Development Unit at the University of Johannesburg. We are very excited to have you join us today for the Foundations of Effective Supervision series of workshops with today's panel discussion titled Mentoring the Next Generation, Insights from Senior and Emeritus Professors on Research and Academia. So my name is Dr. Lorenzo David, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. Firstly, I'd like to express my gratitude to all of you for taking the time to participate, as well as a special thank you to our esteemed panel for making themselves available to join this very interesting and very important discussion. So before we introduce the panelists for today's session, I would like to go through some house rules for the panel discussion today. So firstly, with regards to questions, if you have any questions during the session, please can you feel free to either raise your hand or speak, or alternatively, you can type your question into the chat box. And by doing so, I will ensure that the presenter or the facilitator actually addresses your query at the appropriate time. With regards to recordings and materials, please note that the session is being recorded. The session is being recorded, and the recording will be uploaded to the Moodle communities by the end of the week. There will be a feedback survey that will be sent in the chat during the duration of the session. We kindly ask that you fill it out, and this helps us to assess the workshop's value, or rather the panel discussion's value, as well as to provide suggestions for improvement. Additionally, please take a moment to share your appreciation for all of our panelists' effort. We also would like to thank you once again for being here, and we look forward to a productive session. So I will just begin by sharing my screen, and then we can go through the facilitators' biographies. So Mr. Nkosi, can you please just let me know if my screen is visible, and then we can continue?
Yes, Doug, your screen is visible. You can continue.
Okay, thank you. So once again, the title of today's panel discussion is Mentoring the Next Generation, Insights from Senior and Emeritus Professors on Research and Academia. So we have three very esteemed panelists joining us today. And once again, we want to thank them for making the time to engage in this important discussion. The first panelist that we would like to introduce is Professor Mario Ariati. So a short bio on Prof. Ariati. Prof. Ariati is a founder member of the Department of Biochemistry on the Westville campus of UKZN and currently serves as Professor Emeritus in the discipline. For over 4 decades, his main research interests have focused on the design, synthesis, development, and the assessment of non-viral gene and RNA delivery systems in the context of mammalian gene therapy, an area in which he has authored and co-authored over 80 scientific publications and supervised or co-supervised several master's and doctoral candidates. So that is Prof. Ariati. As you can see, we're starting off with a very, we can look at the caliber of the panelists. The next panelist we'd like to introduce would be Professor Michael Henning. So Professor Michael Henning obtained his PhD in graph theory at the University of Natal in 1989 under the supervision of Professor Hender Swart. He started his academic career at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, the Pietermaritzburg campus, where he taught for 20 years. In 2010, he relocated to the University of Johannesburg as a research professor. His research interests are in the field of graph theory and hypergraph theory, which are areas within the broader field of discrete mathematics and combinatorics. His favorite topics are in the area of domination theory in graphs and transversals in hypergraphs. Professor Michael Henning is an NRF A1 rated researcher. He has over 600 research publications to date, including 8 books published by Springer. His Google Scholar Index is 58 with over 22,000 citations. He has successfully supervised 14 PhD students to date. And the final facilitator who we would like to introduce today is Professor Porka Kefius Ratebe. He is an emerging scientist and an NRF rated Y scholar with a strong research focused on environmental and occupational health and radiation exposure assessments. He is currently an associate professor in the Department of Environmental Health at the University of Johannesburg. Additionally, he lectures on radiation exposure and health-induced outcomes to MSc, Master of Medical Exposure Science, and postgraduate diploma in occupational health students at the University of the Witwatersrand School of Public Health. His expertise extends beyond academia as he actively reviews environmental and occupational health manuscripts for international peer-reviewed journals, IOP and IEEE conferences. As a dedicated researcher and a supervisor, Prof. Ratebe mentors postgraduate students working on projects in occupational and environmental health. So since 2018, he has published over 60 manuscripts in peer-reviewed journals and conference proceedings, contributing valuable insights to the field. His work continues to shape the discourse on radiation exposure and public health, particularly within the African context. So to the audience, I hope that you can see we are very lucky today to have this panel who is before us, and we hope it's going to be an engaging session. So the last thing that I'll do is just share a slide on the points of discussion that we hope to cover in today's panel discussion, and I will run through these with the panelists as we progress through the session. If you have any questions, once again, please feel free to raise your hand, or alternatively type into the chat box, and we will make sure that the panelists are aware of your questions. So I'm just going to stop sharing. And hopefully, Professor Ariati, Professor Henning, and Professor Ratebe, I hope you all are well. Please feel free to unmute your mics if you'd like to maybe introduce yourselves, or alternatively, we can go on to the first question.
Thank you, Dr. Lawrence. I think you have done justice to the introductions. I think we can move on. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So in terms of the first topic we would like to discuss for today, if my laptop decides to behave. So in terms of the first topic, I think it's important for us to speak about the evolution of academia. We understand that academia has actually changed significantly over the years, and this is especially true when it comes to research priorities, teaching methods, as well as mentorship. So the question that I'm going to pose to the panel and leave it open to discussion would be, from your perspective, how has the role of a professor evolved, and what shifts have had the biggest impact on students' academic experiences? So what I will do is I will share this, obviously this question in the presentation. And Prof. Ariati, with your permission, if we could perhaps begin with you, sir, and then we can move through we'll just keep alternating between the panelists, or even feel free to just jump in whenever you feel comfortable. Prof. Ariati, I leave the floor to you.
Dr. David, and also to the fellow panelists and everybody who is listening and participating. Firstly, thank you for inviting me to join you, and I'm clearly the living dinosaur on the panel, and so my perspectives will be from many years of research, and also several years in retirement. Research priorities. I think if I were to reflect on my own experiences when I was starting out, research was more directed towards, let's say, the deeper understanding of a chosen research topic, or perhaps the mechanism of a particular reaction. And I'm speaking from someone who was brought up with a chemistry and biochemistry background. And much less so was the research directed towards, let's say, the development of a process or a product that could be potentially patented or commercialized. And this meant that the researchers could play to their strengths and interests. So there was greater scope for, let's say, blue sky research. And this has all changed, of course, over the years. So yeah, I'd like to start off with that as just my opening comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Prof. Henning and Prof. Ratebe, if you please feel free to join in the conversation. We'd like to keep this, as mentioned, as informal as possible and keep it a discussion, obviously between the panelists as well as between the audience. So, Prof. Henning, if you would like to join in, Prof. Ratebe, please feel free. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. I think, Prof, it's quite spot on. The role of a professor is, evolved significantly over the years, shifting from a traditional surge on the stage model to a more dynamic, interactive approach. Because I mean, you would note that historically, professors primarily served as a knowledge providers who would, from time to time, often deliver lectures and assess students through, standardized forms of assessments. However, with advancements in technology, changing students' needs and new pedagogical approaches, the role has now expanded to include, mentorship, research collaboration, also fostering critical thinking skills amongst the mentees, including students. And one of the most significant shift impacting students' academic experience is the integration of digital learning, which we have begun to now to see over the years, where online resources, virtual classrooms, including the artificial-driven educational tools, has transformed how students engaged with the broader context of academia. Our professors now act as facilitators who would guide students in navigating vast information, rather than delivering knowledge. And additionally, there is a greater emphasis on inclusivity and personalized learning to ensure that students from diverse backgrounds receive the support that they actually need. Another major shift is the focus on experiential learning. Now professors incorporate real-world applications, problem-solving projects, and interdisciplinary studies to enhance student engagement and prepare them for the workforce. And research opportunities, internships, industry partnerships have become more crucial aspects of higher education, allowing students to gain practical experience alongside with the theory that they obtain from professors. And ultimately, the modern professor is not just an instructor, but also a mentor, innovator, a collaborator, and adapting to the changes educational landscape to better serve the students and mentees. Yeah, I think that's my view around it. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Prof. I think, Prof. Henning, I think you've joined us again in the meeting. Apologies if there were some issues with the connection.
Yes.
Prof, please feel free to join in the conversation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I do apologize, I lost connection there, but thank you for inviting me as part of the discussion. So I'm from pure mathematics, so it's a little different to other disciplines and fields as far as mentoring goes. So I will share as the discussion goes on. But for me, it's very much a hands-on with the students. When you work together in mathematics, you just so it's very different. You've got to, as a mentor, of course, the problems you identify are extremely important, because I mean, mathematics, you could have a problem that's open for hundreds of years and the student's not going to make progress. So one of the big roles of a mentor is finding a suitable problem that's not too difficult and unsolved. But also, as I said, when you work with a student, my experience is that it's very much hands-on. You sit together. I mean, in my case, when I did my PhD, one afternoon, 4 hours a week, I would go to a room with my professor, we'd go to a whiteboard and we'd work together. And that's what we did every week. So it's very different to sort of managing. It's the role of a mentor in pure mathematics is very much hands-on. So I think my perspective will be extremely different to a lot of the others on the panel, but hopefully I can give some insights. So, but again, thank you for inviting me to join the panel, and hopefully I can contribute something from my experience.
No, definitely, Prof. The reason why we actually reached out to the panelists is we want to cover as broad of an area as possible. So from all different aspects of academia. So we understand, from engineering to science to like applied mathematics, the approaches are going to be different. And I think it's good for us to have more of a holistic understanding as what are some of the key characteristics that, allow professors to actually successfully mentor students. So your inputs are greatly appreciated. So thank you very much. We can move on, I think, Prof. Henning has actually touched on mentorship in academia. Prof, if I can just reach out to you one more time and ask, from your perspective, how have you observed the role change in terms of a professor, or from when you first started university to now? Has there been, what's been some of the most apparent changes that you've seen over the years, and where do you see this going in the future?
Everything's speeded up. I mean, if you go back again to the dark ages, when I needed to get a research paper, you had to order it to the library into loans. It took 3-4 weeks. Now it's instant. So everything's accelerated. It's so much faster compared to when I started off as a researcher. You can get everything at your fingertips immediately. So I think that's been a big change for me. But as far as, look, of course, you got the computer programming that is extremely helpful just to get you started on problems, to give you a feeling or perspective for a problem. But as I said, in mathematics, to prove a result, you can't really do it with computers. You're proving it for infinitely large numbers, and you've got to give a rigorous mathematical proof. But the computers definitely help. So that's changed enormously compared to 40 years ago when I started. But I think in pure mathematics, it's still very different. I mean, I think traveling a lot, when I started off, you didn't have as much international collaboration, but now it's just absolutely key. You've got to keep up to date. If you don't keep up to date with the latest trends, the problem is you could prove something that's already been proven a year or two ago. If you wait for it to be published in a journal, there's a 2-3 year backlog. So it's really different. You've got to keep up to date. You've got to go to conferences, you've got to collaborate a lot with people, and that's a little different to when I started. So that's some of the challenges we have now. I mean, they're wonderful problems to have, but it is very different to when I initially started off.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Prof. Ratebe, if I can bring you in to this discussion, and we look at the second point that is being shared. What qualities do you think, so from your perspective and your experience, what qualities do you think are essential for being an effective academic mentor? And how can professors best pass on their expertise to younger scholars? Obviously, we understand that if we look at 20 years ago to today, there are generational shifts in terms of the students who are actually coming into university. So how do professors adapt to still, pass on this important knowledge and the skills that they've acquired over years, but adapt to diverse student needs, if I can put it that way?
Thank you. I think I'll give a broader overview around it. An effective academic mentor, a professor, would normally possess a combination of intellectual, interpersonal, and leadership qualities. And some of the most essential, qualities that a professor would have is expertise and experience in his own field. Professors most of the time are approachable and show supportiveness towards students. They've got patience and empathy. They also provide constructive feedback towards students, and they also ensure that these younger scholars network and collaborate to further expand on research opportunities. And this is mainly done, of course, in conferences, in setup of academic communities. And also there is a commitment to professional development, where professors are helping mentees to build essential skills such as writing, presenting, and applying for grants, which is quite key. However, these particular qualities can be transferred from a professor to younger scholars through engagement in collaborative research, where young scholars in research projects allow them to gain hands-on experience and learn different research methodologies directly And professors also would encourage independent thinking rather than simply providing answers to mentors, should encourage mentors to critically think around problems and develop their own solutions. And I think it's quite critical to professors who then ensure the mentorship program runs smoothly to younger scholars. They would offer regular feedbacks and guidance, provide teaching opportunities to young scholars. It can either be co-teaching or assisting preparing lectures in order to prepare them for academic careers if they would be interested in academic careers, because you would have students who would be interested in academic careers, and you would have other students who would be interested in joining industries and so on and so forth. And I think that is quite, critical and essential skills that are transferred to younger scholars. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Some very important, and it's good to get the perspective, as many of us, well, I would assume there's quite a few of us who are actually emerging academics. We're starting out in the field, and to get these insights, I feel is very important, because obviously these are things that are learned through interaction, and they also learn through experience, and there generally isn't a guideline for emerging academics. There's no document that you can go read it. This is what a professor or a supervisor should actually do, and how does it change? So thank you for that input. Prof. Ariati, if I can bring you into the discussion in terms of point number 2. So what qualities do you think are essential for being an effective academic mentor? And how do you pass this on to younger scholars, or how have you passed it on to younger scholars?
Thank you. I'd like to just go back and pick up on a point that Prof. Henning mentioned, and it relates to the time that he spent with his supervisor in front of a whiteboard and discussing ideas and getting down to the nitty-gritty of research projects, and basically informal exchange. And in those situations, so much can be learned by the student. I just want to reflect very quickly on the role of the professor. And I take it from my own experience. When I went to university, it was in, the long distant 1969. And traditionally, professors were endowed with their title through academic achievement and recognition in the field of their research. Teaching skills, administrative skills, and people skills were much less important in achieving that status those days. Today, a professor spends a great deal of time fulfilling administrative functions, managing research programs. The number of masters and doctoral candidates in their groups are larger than those of 40 years ago. Consequently, each member of the group has limited access to the professor, and the time that they are able to spend with that professor is also very limited. So there's less time to work shoulder to shoulder with students in the lab. In my case, I'm speaking from the point of view of someone who's worked in an experimental science, laboratory-based science. So nowadays, it's important to improve the research output. Lots of journal manuscripts being viewed by the professors, lots of pressure to publish, and so forth. Getting to the question that you asked me about mentorship today, what needs to be brought into mentoring today? Through mentorship, of course, we've got the fledgling of scholars and researchers, and of course you've got to remember that this propagation is much like propagating a sapling, and what I believe one can best do for young researchers is school them into asking the right research questions. So they've got to ask the sort of questions that will lead to conceptual leaps. It's no good asking a trivial research question, because you will get a quick answer, and it will not be making a significant contribution to the field that you're in. I'm trying to not use the word me too or the expression me too science, but I think you understand what I mean. I think
Yes.
the qualities of an effective academic mentor today. Firstly, the mentor has to be credible and creditable in the eyes of the scholar. That's essential. You've got to be an authority. That student has to have confidence in you. You've got to set an example. You've got to be a good communicator. You've got to be a good listener. You've got to be sensitive to the responses that you receive from your student. And you've got to tailor your mentorship to each individual being mentored. We're not all the same. We have strengths and weaknesses, sensitivities, and so it is. But it's an enormously difficult task, as I said, because today a professor would need an MBA really to perform the job properly, because time management is so important, and they're being taken away from the core duty of teaching and research. So much more has devolved from the old administrative structures down to the schools and faculties and departments, disciplines, and lecturers and so forth, that less and less time is devoted to mentoring your flock.
Yeah.
Thanks, Doc.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for that. Once again, members of the audience, if there are any points that you would like to bring up in addition to, what we would hope to discuss in the session, please feel free to type it in the chat box, or you can raise your hand once again. Mr. Nkosi and myself will be monitoring the chat, obviously for any hands raised or any questions as well. So thank you for that, Prof. I think we can move on to the next point, which would be something that I'm actually very interested in, is balancing research and teaching. Prof. Ariati, you actually mentioned that the enormous responsibility in terms of administrative tasks, which is placed on, professors today. And that just brings up the question, how do you balance your research with teaching or administrative tasks? We can add to that. And how would you personally balance these demands? And has this balance changed over the years? And if so, in what way? So I think Prof. Ariati has touched on the topic, but Prof. Henning, if we can bring you in on that topic. Thank you. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you. Again, my apologies. I don't know why I'm losing
No
connection.
problem.
But if you don't mind me going back to number 2,
Yeah,
this
sure. No
effective
problem.
academic mentor, I think,
Yeah.
as my colleagues have mentioned, it really involves a combination of skills to be a good mentor. I mean, for example, let's say you're an absolute genius, but you can't explain or communicate things. Everything's so clear to you, but you don't know how to explain that. It isn't so helpful. You really want to be able to explain concepts and be a good teacher, as well as, of course, you've got to be on the cutting edge of research.
Yeah.
And you've got to have some interpersonal relationships. So, for example, when I work with the students or other colleagues, you've got to have the ground rule that you can think aloud. That when you're on the board throwing out ideas and suggestions and problems, you've got to think aloud. Doesn't matter how silly or stupid it may appear.
Yeah.
You've got to think your ideas aloud.
Yeah.
And that's okay. If it's no good, you move on to other ones. But that's part of the process. And I'm thinking of mentors as well. I wrote a book recently with a professor who's in industrial engineering, very applied area, but his approach is different. He has like 50 PhD students at a time. He manages them for 5-10 minutes a week. He sees each one. He's a manager. The other extreme is sort of what I do. I sit with a student and we work together, hands-on. We work on the problem together, thinking aloud. We sit for hours together. So in some areas, you can't have too many students. I think in pure mathematics, 2 or 3 sort of the maximum, because you spend 10 or 15 hours per week on each student. So it does depend, on the field. Also, I think another thing for effective mentoring is, in my opinion,
I think, Prof. Henning, we've just lost you. I think it could be an issue with the reception. We'll just wait a few moments for Prof. Henning to rejoin, and we will continue with the discussion. Thank you. I see there's a hand up from the audience. Martin Eke. Please feel free to unmute your mic, sir. I'm just going to enable it, and feel free to go ahead and address the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, professors, for the presentation. It's quite interesting. I just would like to add to the number 2 discussion on mentorship in academia. And just to say that in mentorship, for me, it's like a transfer of life, a transfer of academic life. From my experience, I came from a background where during my master's, we had to write on papers and submit on hard copies to the supervisor, who has to take some weeks, months, even before he gets back to us with his feedback. But then when I came to South Africa, sorry, I'm an international student. When I came to South Africa, I met a mentor who was conscious of time. So he says to me, Martin, you have a week to submit this. And then he is writing, I am submitting my work, and he's giving me comments on track changes. In fact, I never used hard copy to submit anything. For me, it was an experience I never had. But now he took me through that, and I became time conscious, became more hardworking. In fact, my mentor was a workaholic. He made me to learn how to work hard. And today, I am beginning to see myself in his shoe. So I think mentorship has to do with a transfer of your life. Your student eventually may even begin to work like the way you do. I also saw this thing of academic family in mentorship, a situation where the mentor arranges for a meeting between him and all the mentees, and they come to a round table to discuss issues about their work. And there is a crossbreeding of ideas and all not words. Another thing I also discovered, it could be like a weakness, like one of the professors says, it says that yes, the mentors also have their strengths and weaknesses. But sometimes when the mentors seem to hide those weaknesses away from the mentee, it doesn't give the mentee a balanced growth. For instance, it was only when I discovered that, oh, my mentor's tickle was also rejected. I said, okay. So after all, it's not like I must be a pro before I get doing things I needed to do. So if my mentor's tickle, which was submitted, was rejected tutor 1 through 3, then it means I also have the prospect to grow and all of that. So that's an aspect of a mentee, which sometimes they try to hide away from their mentors, and their mentors only see them as super mentors, not understanding that they've also got their own challenges they are dealing with. Thank you very much. I think another thing I want to add is the issue of patience. Sometimes some mentors rather, are not patient with their mentees. And when you see some comments that they make on their paper, it demoralizes the spirit and morale of their mentees. So those are part of the qualities that mentors and mentees need to absorb to keep going in the academy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. Thank you very much for those insights. It's good to also view it from a different perspective as well from the students. So thank you very much. Prof. Henning, apologies Prof, for any issues, technical issues.
Yes.
Please feel free to continue.
I do apologize again.
No problem.
Yeah, thank you for the input of my colleagues. It's very, very useful. Also I think part of mentoring, as you said, you've got to be approachable. You've got to encourage the students. That's a key thing. Because often in research, you can't predict research. It's unpredictable. And a student could bang their head against the wall for weeks and not make progress. So you've really got to encourage them, because they could easily get despondent.
Yeah.
But again, I think if you give a suitable problem, it doesn't have to be a groundbreaking research that you can do after PhD, I think.
Yeah.
But you want original research that you can make progress on. I mean, I've been working on a problem for 40 years. I've been working on it thousands of hours, but that you don't want to give to a student. You just need to get them doing original research. And to me, so finding a good problem is important. Some disciplines, the student has to come up with a problem.
Yeah.
Now, in my field of mathematics, the student has no idea what the cutting edge research is, what the topics are. You've got to, as a mentor, propose possible problems, and depending on the student's got different interests. They've got different skills. They may like certain topics, other topics they just struggle a bit with. So you've got to find what is a suitable topic and project for the student. Also, you've got to, I find as mentoring, especially mathematics, you've got to write extremely clearly. Exposition's got to be good. You've got to have the correct amount of proof detail. It's no use hand waving saying clearly this holds. You know, you've got to show the student how to put the correct amount of detail in the writing to make it absolutely clear. Because I mean, my problem was when I started off, I would present on the board to my supervisor what I was doing, and she would say, no, I don't understand that. Explain it to me. And I thought she was just being stupid. But when I tried to explain it, I realized I was wrong. I'd missed details out. So she forced me to always put in the details, and we could rigorously, be very rigorous in checking the proofs.
Yeah.
And I've now tried to develop that with my students. I say to them, look, I'm not quite honest, but I say 10% of the research are your brilliant ideas. 90% is the hard work of writing it up clearly so that it's, that you got the correct amount of details. And then you've got to show the student, as you work with them, how to write up, how to put the details in, how to be very logical in your thinking.
Yeah.
And that's part of it. I mean, of course, the brilliant ideas are key, but if you can't write up clearly, no one's going to be able to read it, and you can't check, more importantly, if there's mistakes.
Yeah.
So that's part of the mentoring process, is the exposition, the writing up of the ideas, putting it together logically. That is part of a mentoring process. In addition, of course, to the suitable topics that will suit the student, depending on their interests and what they're really good at. So that's all part of it. Yes, I think that's all part of the process of mentoring.
I think it's interesting to, from a student's perspective, as well as from someone just entering academia, to see that there's so many different areas, so many different facets that has to be considered in terms of when you reach the stage of, having multiple students. And I think the important point that you raised there was, often a supervisor, from my own experience, a supervisor will have a few projects or a few areas of discussion, of study that will be open to you. But I think it's also important for the student to also, like you've mentioned, for them to have an interest in it, because obviously you are going to be putting in a lot of hard hours. There's going to be days where you're going to be very frustrated, and days or weeks or even months where things are not working. So from a student's perspective, having a supervisor who actually gives you the opportunity to choose your project and something that aligns with your interests, by having that interest actually allows you to push through the difficult times. I think there's just something that I wanted to add in there, but thank you very much, Prof. So going on to the third point, which would be balancing research and teaching. So we can start with Prof. Ratebe, if you would like to join in, and then we can move on to Prof. Ariati and then go back to Prof. Henning, if that's okay.
It was
Prof. Ratebe, I think you are muted. We are unable to hear you. It's cutting out. It's putting you back on mute for some reason. So I'm not sure if it's something with the system or maybe the network. Let me just see if I can. Okay, so while we will give Prof. Ratebe a few minutes, I think it could be a technical issue that he's maybe experiencing. So, and if he's back in, okay. Prof. Ariati, if we can maybe bring you into the conversation, and thereafter we can, when Prof. Ratebe is back, we can follow on from the conversation. So I think, Prof, you've mentioned in terms of how the balance, well, you mentioned about administration and teaching and research responsibilities, but from your perspective, how did you personally balance the demands of research as well as teaching, and we can even add to that supervision, and just from your insights, how has this changed over the years, and what's been the most apparent changes that you've noticed?
Well, firstly, I have to say that my formal teaching at undergraduate level ended when I retired 15 years ago. So quite a lot has happened in the 15 years
Yes, Prof.
that I've been. Yeah. And in biochemistry, we have rapid developments, exponential developments, and a lot of demands are placed on the researcher to keep abreast, as Professor Henning has mentioned, of the field. And it's awfully difficult to do the reading outside of your topic, which is so important, and it was so important for me, and it was imparted by my professor at the time, that one should read outside of one's topic, because that's where you get those interesting ideas that you can apply to your field. The idea of cross-pollination was very important. Balancing research and teaching. Today, there is an enormous amount of pressure on the academic staff to achieve certain performance norms. And this is applied university-wide. And so to achieve these norms, they have to dedicate themselves much more to activities which take them away from the laboratory. So there is more time which has to be devoted to teaching. The class sizes have increased enormously over the years, and so assessing the students takes a lot longer, and consequently the research will suffer. Administrative duties we've already mentioned. They've increased significantly over the years, much more so in the 15 years that I've been out of the mainstream. And I often sit with my colleagues who are on the permanent staff and discuss these matters, and almost without exception, the conversation moves to the overwhelming administrative burden that they carry. Yeah, awfully difficult to balance research and teaching.
Yeah. Thank you, Prof. Ariati. Prof. Ratebe, are you? Is the technical issue being resolved? Are you able to join us once again? Prof, I think you're still muted. Okay, we will contact Prof. Ratebe and try and resolve the issue while the session is going on.
Hello, David. Sorry.
Oh, back, Prof. Okay, thank you.
Oh, can you hear me now? Thanks.
Yes, we can hear you perfectly. Thank you.
No, thank you. I was touching on a very important factor touched by Professor Mario earlier on balancing research and teaching, which is quite a daunting task that requires careful time management. At times it requires adaptability and prioritization of tasks. I personally use a structured schedules to allocate specific tasks and time blocks for research, and to prepare, lecture sessions and one-on-one mentoring sessions with my postgraduate students. But, lately, technology has also assisted us in playing a critical role in terms of streamlining our tasks, such as collaboration as well as marking of students to further engage on other pressing tasks and reduce some of the workloads on our shoulders. This particular balance, it has shifted over the years due to evolving academic expectations. And of course, universities now, they have their own academic expectations. Professors may focus more on research and publishing to establish their academic reputation, which was what was touched on by Professor Eni earlier on. But as they gain experience, mentoring, administrative responsibilities, they often increase and requires adjustment in terms of time management. And the shift to online and hybrid learning has changed teaching dynamics, of course, making the digital engagement, a larger part of our own workload. So we as professors become successfully in our balancing of the tasks and these particular demands, which we normally rely on organizational skills, delegation of tasks to some of the postgraduate students and colleagues, and the ability to integrate research within our teaching in order to ensure that our students benefit from the latest developments within our field. Yeah, that's my addition. Thanks.
Thank you. Prof. Henning, is there anything you'd like to add to the discussion in terms of balancing research, teaching, supervision? Now, you've touched on a few points, but is there anything additional you'd like to add to that?
Yes, I mean, I agree that I think it's a very difficult balancing act. I mean, I think in a dream world, if you're a good teacher, your door's always open. You interrupted every 2 minutes. If you're a good researcher, you need 100% focus where you can't be interrupted because you're concentrating so hard on a problem. And if you're interrupted, your thought process goes. So it almost looks like the opposite extremes. You can't be, making a wonderful teacher where your door's always open, and a really good researcher where you're not interrupted, you focus all the time. And yet there are examples of mentors I know where they do both. I mean, 20 years I taught at Maritzburg, and this was a difficult juggle. But even now that I'm a research professor, it's still difficult to juggle everything because even the admin, I get every morning when I wake up, there's 5 new papers to referee or invitations. Each paper takes 15 hours. That's 75 hours extra work a day. You can't accept it. You've got to examine PhD theses, 6 editorial boards, etc. So you have to prioritize. You've got to learn as a mentor sometimes to say no. So I can't referee 5 papers a day. It's 75 hours a day. I can't do it. So it is very difficult to juggle everything. And I think you have to prioritize. So journals that I publish in, I'll referee for them. But if I get from these obscure journals, I sometimes have to say no. But, the teaching is a very important part of it. So it helps you explain the concepts. And it helps with the mentoring but of course the research is key as well. So it is a very difficult juggling act. I don't know of a good solution.
Thank you, Prof. Yeah, I think that's a general consensus from across the panel that it is not an easy task to actually balance the research and the teaching. And I think it was an important point that you brought up, Prof, about when you're teaching, there's certain characteristics you need to have, and as a researcher, especially when you're working on something that is a difficult problem, you need that silence. So that I found is quite interesting. So thank you for your insights on that question. The next point we'd like to go through, and I think many of us this is something that we'd be particularly interested in, would be some of the challenges that early career academics face. So I think we can go through the panel once again, and possibly we can start with Prof. Ratebe, if that's okay, then Prof. Henning and Prof. Ariati. Apologies, Prof. So yes, if we can go through point number 4, which basically discuss what are some of the biggest hurdles that you faced early in your career, and how did mentorship help you navigate them? The last part of this discussion would be, what advice would you offer to younger researchers that many of us are in the panel today starting out? What advice would you offer? Prophet Tebe, I'll leave the floor to you.
Thank you, David. Personally, my biggest hurdle that I've experienced over the years, well, at the very beginning of my career as an academic, was, of course, securing research funding, and also to publish in reputable journals, and also to adapt in the demands, very much demanding teaching and administrative roles within the academic departments. And one of the biggest hassle is establishing a strong research portfolio while balancing other academic responsibilities, because you have to start earlier in building your own research portfolio. Competition for grants, funding can be intense. It requires persistence, strategic networking. Those are some of the things that becomes the biggest challenges within an early right to establish academic field. To adjust to expectations of academic culture, such as peer review, departmental politics, institutional requirements can be very overwhelming. So mentorship plays, a critical role in navigating this particular challenge. So this is what we would share with, our mentees, because having experienced mentors providing guidance on research direction, writing grants, networking opportunities can make a significant difference in their early careers, because we offer valuable insights into work balance, life. We help them, manage stresses and avoid burnouts, because it can be very demanding at the earlier stages. So my advice would be to seek mentorship actively, to collaborate with peers and develop a clear research focus, publishing constantly and consistently, apply for funding early, and build professional relationships that can lay the foundation for long-term success within your academic career. I think that's my addition, David.
Thank you. Prof. Henning, if we can bring you into the conversation on this topic.
Yes, thank you. Let me go to the middle one, building a research portfolio, and I'll come back to research funding.
Yeah, sure.
I think for me, the challenge when I'd, start off as an early academic was that I'd apply for funding, whatever, through the dean's office. And when they looked at my publications, they were all with my supervisor. And they said, no, you've got to show some independence on your own. And that was a difficult transition, because I worked so well with my supervisor. We thought the same way. But I had to then start working with other groups of people. And I think it's important as a early career academic that at some point you've got to break away, in a sense. I mean, you still work with your supervisor, but you need to widen the horizons, work with other groups. You've got to make some breakthroughs in research. If people have made part contributions in research papers, you've got to go a bit deeper. See, can you go deeper than that? You've got to also work with, if you can, some of the big names. Now, that's difficult. But if you can go to some conferences, establish some big names in your field, and see if there's a possibility to get a foot in to work with some of these big names, that helps your portfolio. If you can, of course, I mean, mathematics, they've got this ranking of journals. You've got the top ones, but if you can try and get papers in the top journals, it does also help your research portfolio. As far as research funding, for me as an early academic, it is actually a little bit easier, because university, they try to do some seed funding for young academics, and they provided me opportunity to funding. The NRF in my day were good. They would give funding to young researchers. But for me, the bigger challenge now that I'm old and a bit of a dinosaur, it's very difficult to get funding. I mean, even as an A1 rated researcher, the last 10 years in the NRF, I've only had one successful application. It gets, to me, more and more difficult when you get older. To me, they try to encourage the young researchers, which I suppose makes sense. But on the other hand, you've also, if you don't have the mentors, how can you grow the younger generation? So I do think you can't completely ignore the older generation. But and then so those to me are the sort of the main challenges for funding a research portfolio. Try and publish in good journals, try and work with, you've got to work on your own a bit. You've got to have some papers on your own, but you've also got to have papers with a group, because it shows if you work with a group, that you can work with people, that you can collaborate. That's very important. Also good to have some single author papers to show that, you know, you're an independent researcher. So both are important. And also break a little bit away from the supervisor or even people from your own university. You've got to show that you've got a bit of an international group that you can work with. It's so that you've got to again juggle as a young researcher quite a few aspects, and that is a bit of a challenge.
It seems to be quite strategic. I mean, like as a you say a younger academic be coming into this, for many of us, and I'll be honest, like my perception of it was we just have to try and publish as many as as many papers as you can. But judging from what you've said, Prof, we need to be actually quite strategic in where we publish, with who we publish. In terms of collaborations within our university, within the country, and even potentially abroad. So that I find that very interesting as well. And I think also, if I can maybe ask you, Prof. Henning, in terms of that initial step, I mean, just say we've recently got your PhD, you're still doing some work with your supervisor, but now you need to start branching out. You need to start stepping into your own and creating sort of like a space for you. How was that transition? Because as an early academic, it can be quite nerve-wracking. You don't necessarily have the full support. You still have the support of your supervisor, but you're obviously trying to grow in your own position as well. So any thoughts you have on that?
Yes, it is a bit challenging because I mean you're dependent on your supervisor for a couple of years, and they can check your work to see if there's gaps in it. So now, if you do work on your own, there is a bit of a risk. Have you overlooked something? So there is that little element that's of uncertainty.
Yeah.
But I think I think you can join a research group. So let's say you go to a local conference, in our case, the local annual maths conference. You can then try and collaborate with some colleagues there just to build up some confidence. And then also from all your work in the PhD, you've got your area, your niche that you love. You know people that are working in the area internationally. You can see what they're doing, and you could maybe even contact some of them and suggest, look, here's a problem that looks interesting. Would you be interested in working with me? So you've got to be a little proactive in contacting the experts in your field and just see if there's a possibility you can collaborate with them. That would help. But I said also often the big names are just, it's difficult to break in there because they work, all the Oxford, Cambridge, Princeton people all work together. And for you to break in is a bit difficult.
Yeah.
But often a conference, I mean, for me, I remember after one of the parallel sessions, I bumped into this Professor Edish. He's regarded as one of the top mathematicians ever. And I bumped into him and he said, do you have a problem to work on? And I didn't want to talk to him, but my supervisor pushed me towards him. We started working and it was amazing. I eventually published a paper with Edish, which was for me a huge breakthrough.
Yeah.
So if you can have opportunities to work with some of the big names in your field, it definitely helps. But even just a smaller group, just to build up some confidence, you work together with people, because I mean, when you collaborate, it's often 10 times more effective. You all got different ideas, you're all working together, it just accelerates the process. So if you can venture out a little bit away from your supervisor after your PhD and postdoc, it definitely enhances the research experience for you. And you could always, let's say you've solved a problem, you've written it up, you could always send it to your supervisor just to check. I mean, they won't be a co-author, but they wouldn't mind just checking it, just as a safeguard, and then you can submit it. So you don't cut ties completely with your mentors. You can still rely on them heavily, and the mentors would be more than happy to work through some of the work you did, even if it's independent work that they haven't been involved in.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Prof. There is a question in the chat, and I think it's directed at all members of the panel. So the question is from Rafilwe, and So Rafilwe says, good morning, esteemed professors and chairperson. My question is, as a postdoctoral candidate, what are the things we should focus more on to better serve our hosts, as well as to add to our profile as researchers and future academics? So I can leave the question open to the panel. If anyone would like to contribute, please feel free to unmute and just go ahead.
Yeah, I think as a postdoc, the advantage of a postdoc is normally you have no more responsibility. You don't have to do teaching or marking. You can really focus on research, and that can help the mentors and your colleagues enormously, because you've got the time factor that they don't have.
Yeah.
And I think that makes it such an advantage if you can then just go so deeply into the problem, do the rigor, the mathematical rigor, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then often your mentors and colleagues haven't got that available time that you have as a postdoc, where you don't have all these massive distractions. You can just focus on making these big breakthroughs. So that is the big advantage of a postdoc, and you can write up.
Yeah.
You've got the time to do that, and you can still bounce ideas off your mentors that, but the fact that you've got the energy levels and you don't have the distractions, that makes a huge advantage as a postdoc student.
Thank you, Prof. Prof. Ratebe, is there anything you'd like to contribute to this, to address Rafilwe? Say Dr. Rafilwe, my apologies. Prof. Ariati, can I bring
Yes,
you?
I think the points raised by Prof. Henning are extremely valid. I'd like to make some comment within under the topic of challenges for early career academics, and I think the question falls under that ambit.
Yes.
Okay, so we've spoken a lot about mentorship of scholars and students. Mentorship of early career academics is absolutely crucial. I think that point's been made. All sorts of guidance is required, grant writing, and also one has to try to capture the energies of the young academic and channel them, funnel them, bring them to focus on a research topic. One has to remember that if you are going to establish yourself, and the goal would be in South Africa, would be to successfully achieve a rating with the NRF. A lot will depend not so much on the number of publications that you will have generated, but more on the impact and reputation you've built up in one or more related areas. So, and I've seen examples of this myself, and this is very important, is that you've got to become known in a field rather than hopping from one little thing, co-authoring one publication with a group far away and another in a completely unrelated area simply because you generated an infrared spectrum, or that is quantity, but it does not say too much about the person's expertise and their reputation and standing within their area of research. So that I think is very important. And again, Prof. Henning mentioned that there will be disappointments, and sometimes you've just got to hang in there. So tenacity and perseverance is very important, and not to hop onto bandwagons willy-nilly. I don't think that's a constructive activity in the early development of one's career.
Thank you, Prof. Prof. Ratebe?
Hi, David. Oh, sorry, I think I was struggling with connectivity.
No problem.
Yeah, look, I think Prof. Henning put it very well to say it's very best for young emerging scholars to break away from their supervisors in order to establish themselves. Fully in agreement with that. I think it's very vital. to start as your own, to break away from your supervisor and begin to, work with other scholars. And I think postdocs should focus more on that because they've got enormous amount of time around research than any other little academic and administrative activities that they should be focusing on. Establishing their own ideas, writing and becoming persistent on establishing their own ideas around research that would take them very, very far. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Prof. So I think, Prof, you can go ahead, Prof. Ariati.
Yes, Doc, I just wanted to pick up on a point raised by Prof. Henning about single author publications and to just highlight the difficulty that you would face in doing that within a discipline such as biochemistry or chemistry or microbiology. In chemistry now, one can isolate extremely important and novel compounds from indigenous plants and so forth, but you will find it very difficult to publish that data if it is not accompanied with, say, a biological assessment of those products as potential drugs, in hypertensive treatment or diabetes, etc. So it's really very difficult to publish single author papers in our disciplines, the technology has progressed so rapidly, and the instrumentation has become so much more sophisticated and is not always available at the institution in which you're based. And it requires, therefore, the collaboration of workers at other centers within the country or from outside the country. So if you're going to write a single author paper in biochemistry, it's very likely going to be a review paper.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for the contribution, Prof. I think it leads into the fact that, and this is one of the reasons why we wanted to, have members of the panel from different fields, because every field or every area of study will have a different approach, and some things will be possible in certain areas and may not be possible in others. So thank you to all of the panelists for your contributions. I think we've actually reached the halfway point of the session, and I think there's a message in the chat.
Yes, sorry, Dr. David. There is a message or a question under Q&A from Dr. Lulama. The question is there a difference in mentoring approaches and your own experiences between male and female mentors and mentees, especially in mentoring young researchers who are also building families over and above the administrative, leaders, and teaching and learning responsibilities?
Okay, so that so I'll leave the question open to the panel. If you just go to the Q&A tab, you'll be able to see the question, and I would leave it open to the panel if anyone would like to respond to Dr. Lulama.
I don't think the approach of mentors towards mentees it's gender based. There's always no difference in terms of the mentoring approach towards two genders, so it's normally the same. But of course, it will always be a matter of personal and family responsibilities between the mentees that one will tend to lean more or on feeling for those ones with more family responsibilities for not making through in terms of their work, in terms of their submissions, as opposed to others. But in my experience, there's no really of a difference in terms of the approach on the two genders. Really, there's no difference.
Thank you, Prof. Ratebe. I don't know if Prof. Henning or Prof. Ariati would like to respond, so I'll just leave a few seconds for that, and if not, then we will move on. I hope that we've answered your question, Dr.
Well, just a quick one. I would agree with that comment. I don't think that it matters much whether we're talking about a female or a male. What I would like to say is that on the issue of juggling the act of bringing up a young family and developing a fledgling career in your research, I've always tried to advise students early on in their studies to make the sacrifices, if possible, before you settle down and raise a family, because the demands placed on you to succeed in your research will be tremendous. So I've always tried to be to address prevention rather than cure.
Yeah. Thank you, Prof. Prof. Ariasi. Yeah, so Dr. Lama, I hope that answers your question. Prof. Henning, if you want to jump in, please feel free. Please, to the members of the panel, you don't have to wait for me to. Please feel free to unmute and contribute at any point. We're here to listen to the advice of the panel, and yeah, so please feel free. Thank you. I think we do. Yeah, Prof. Henning. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, I think it is a very challenging one with family, but again, in my area, mathematics, what you can do is you have some, what I call big problems you're working on, and some smaller ones that you can get into, and then you break and back into it again. And if you always have a list of little problems, you can always think about that, even when you have to do whatever, changing nappies or something, you can still think of problems so I think a large problem for me, I've worked, I said, for 40 years on one problem, still haven't solved it. I've had one recently after 11 years, we finally submitted it. I had one after 20 years of working on it. Those are the big problems, but you can't just work on the big problems. You get so discouraged. So you've got to have other problems that you can always make progress on and that you can get into quickly. Even if you interrupt it, you can get back into it again. So I think even if you have lots of these so-called little problems, they're not little in that sense, but they're in the sense that you can get into them quickly, that even when you are distracted with other family events, you can still think about these problems. And so you need this wide spectrum of problems you can work on. I mean, so for example, I mean, for the NRF rating, as we know, they look at your last 8 years' work, just your top 6 papers. University ones publications, they get money from the government. So you've got to juggle that. You've got to juggle these big breakthrough papers that the NRF need, and you've got to get these so-called smaller research problems that you can publish in good eyesight journals, but problems that don't need this thousands of hours of intense concentration. You've got to have both of these problems on your plate, the small, medium, large problems, so to speak. And that, I think, will get you through. Even when you've got other distractions, you can still work on these research problems.
Thank you, Prof. There's another question in the chat. It's from Carabello Macmillan, and the question reads: "Greetings, Chair, and the panel of great professors. My request to the panel is to provide practical advice on how to navigate through the evolution of academia." So, the question goes on to say, given the high student numbers, competitive funding opportunities, limitations of academic positions, high APC when publishing, and internal politics. So I'll leave the question open to the panel. If anyone would like to contribute, please feel free.
Sure, this is a difficult one. Maybe I can kick off by saying that universities are today far different from what universities were conceived to be 500-600 years ago. The number of students going to university is enormous. The expectation is enormous. And very often I believe that students are not given the correct advice. And they go to university because that's what you're supposed to do after you complete your high school education. And regrettably, they will wander through university life, emerge with a degree, and find that they have enormous difficulty in finding employment with that qualification. So, yeah, I don't know. It's a really big, it's a difficult. I've always battled with this particular concept. It's that we seem to have too many people at university for the wrong reason. How do you navigate through all of this? I think we need to have advice given at school level, career advice at school level, and the parents themselves need to be more savvy as to what can be done with a university education. I know this is probably not answering the specific question, but it does trouble me an awful lot, specifically because I know a lot of families make enormous sacrifices to put their children through university, only to be disappointed at the end when their child sits at home and is unable to find work. So, yeah, it's a big challenge. It's a big challenge.
Thank you, Prof. If Prof. Henning or either Prof. Ratebe would like to join, please feel free, or if not, then we can move on to the next point of discussion.
Again, it's an extremely challenging problem how to navigate through academia, because you do have the teaching, the research, the marking, the admin, you've got journal refereeing, etc. So it is challenging. As far as the limited funding goes, I mean, to me, first prize is always if you can get funding for international, to keep abreast internationally. If you can get funding to travel international conferences. If you can't, second prize is let's just keep abreast locally within South Africa. You can go to the local conferences. But if you simply don't have funding for that, then the third option, which is the very poor one, is to work in isolation, in a sense that you can't collaborate that much with colleagues, but you can still form groups, you can still collaborate. So even like in my case, I can still do a lot of research without funding, but in some areas like biochemistry or medical sciences, you are absolutely dependent on funding or data to do any research. So it is very much field dependent. And then the funding is critical. But in some fields, I mean, at worst, I could work in isolation, which is a really, really bad option. You want to collaborate internationally. You want to keep abreast of the latest developments. You want to be on the cutting edge of research internationally. If you can't do that, you want to do it locally. And if you still simply can't get, normally university will give you funding to go to local conferences, and you just got to grab those opportunities and just form groups to collaborate with. That's the main thing of a conference. It's to present your work, to interest people, but also to see what other people are working on and try and get groups together that you can collaborate with. I mean, that is one option through the funding challenges that we have. But unfortunately, as academics, we do have to juggle teaching, research, admin, marking, refereeing, all that's part of it. And it is more and more challenging when the students don't have the background. It does become extremely challenging because then as the mentor or young academic, you've got to invest so much more time into your modules. So it is a challenge I think all academics face, is how to navigate through the challenges of academia.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof. Prof. Ratebe, I'll leave it open to you if you would like to respond. Maybe you have a different perspective, or alternatively, you can let us know.
No, I think both the profs are spot on. It depends. Firstly, institution per institution. For an example, in terms of the internal politics, my advice has always been that scholars should stay away from internal politics. Should focus on their work and do their work and get it done. There's always not. It's not. It's not. A defined line to academia to say this is a number of students that you need to take, but you need to be very clear on your capacity and other academic responsibilities in terms of number of students that you are willing to take. And that should be very, very clear. And of course, in terms of funding opportunities, good proposals with well-defined problems, with well-proposed solutions would always make it through in terms of standing a chance to obtain funding from the funders, So that's there's no one way around it. It's this, it's yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Ratebe. If we can actually just stay with you in terms of the next point we'd like to discuss is work-life balance in academia. How did you manage work-life balance during your career? And what advice would you offer to early career scholars about maintaining a healthy balance?
David, managing work-life balance in academia, especially in the early years, it's a significant challenge because you've got research deadlines, you've got teaching commitments, and you also have academic or administrative responsibilities, So early in my career, I often found myself working long hours, sacrifice personal time to meet academic expectations. But over time, I realized that setting clear boundaries and then prioritizing tasks was, key and essential. Time management strategies such as scheduling dedicated research and teaching hours while ensuring personal time for rest and family, helping me maintain, a healthy balance. My advice is for younger scholars, of course, is to establish boundaries early, learn to say no to excessive commitments that do not align with your core goals. Prioritize self-care, as burnout can hinder long-term success. Seek active mentorship, delegate tasks where possible, and integrate small breaks into your routine to improve productivity, of course, as well as well-being. And remember that sustainable academic career is built on both personal achievements and personal well-being. That's my advice.
Thank you, Prof. Prof, actually, if we can bring you in on this topic as well in terms of the work-life balance in academia.
I'm a very poor example of what should be done. I threw my life into what I was doing. I virtually married the subject, and I was working 7 days a week in biochemistry, whether it was my research, teaching, marking, preparing lectures, and so forth. And I woke up in my mid-40s and discovered that I was unmarried. And so I married late in life. And that is definitely the wrong thing to do. I've since discovered that, it is much, I find that activities that clear the brain, like the occasional game of golf or long walks, or those things are refreshing and reinvigorating. And so I would encourage all young academics to have a balanced life, and that their work must not take over their lives, and that their personal lives must not suffer unduly because of their professional goals and activities. Terribly important to get out there and smell the flowers and breathe in the fresh air.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Prof. Thank you very much for those insights. Prof. Henning, anything else anything you would like to add to this discussion on work-life balance?
Work-life balance is absolutely critical. It may mean sacrificing some things. So, for example, when I was a young academic, I loved chess, but I used to put in two hours a day studying. You got to study all the openings, but I had to choose between chess and mathematics. You can't do both. So I eventually dropped the chess, but some things I didn't drop. So, for example, I loved running and just hiking, and that's critical because often the key ideas I had when my mind was at rest, almost you clear the brain, you've worked hard on a problem, you go for a little run, you relax, and then suddenly part of the brain comes into play when you're at rest, and you get these amazing ideas. So I never sacrificed things like the running, the cross country, the hiking. That was an integral part of my work because, as I said, I often get the good ideas there. But I think a healthy balance, even eating well, sleeping well, I find if you're tired, you can't think well. If I'm tired and I work 10 hours on a problem, I'd rather be well rested and work 1 hour on the problem. So I think you've got to, it doesn't matter how much the pressure is, you want to work 20 hours a day, you've almost got to limit it, make sure you're well rested, because you're far more productive when you're well rested. So I think the healthy life balance is, to me, extremely important.
Thank you. It seems to be a thing of in terms of hours put, we aiming for quality over quantity in terms of being rested. So thank you for that, Prof. We can move on to the next point, which would be, and I think this has actually been discussed already in different questions. So for this point, I will actually leave it open to the panel if there's any new perspectives or anything else they'd like to add to it on the importance of collaboration. So how important is collaboration in your own experience? And I know we've discussed this both in terms of research and mentorship. And what advice would you offer to younger researchers when it comes to forming and navigating collaborations? I think the navigating collaborations part is something we haven't touched on so far. So I'll leave it open to members of the panel. Please feel free to unmute and you can, we'd love to hear your insights.
Yeah, I say collaboration, it absolutely enhances the research experience. So what you've got to do is, I get like a small group that are my key collaborators. I've got like one in America and France, Denmark, I've got a Slovenian and some Europeans, but it's a small group that I collaborate mainly with individually. Then you've got another group that you do work with a lot of the time. But the collaboration is absolutely amazing. I said it almost accelerates the research by it's tenfold. I mean, you just on your own, you got the ideas, but when you're in a big group and you're working together and you get these ideas, it just accelerates everything. So, but find people, you've got to find collaborators that you can work well with, that you write the same, you think the same way. So you've got to be a little bit selective in your collaborators. Of course, it's got to be areas that are of your interest. And I work with different collaborators in different areas. But I think, to me, I mean, I said maybe 5% of my papers are sole author, 95% are just with collaboration, maybe even more. And I mean, I can work with a lot of the top Hungarians. It's one guy won the International Maths Olympiad, and you get to work with these brilliant minds. Some go very deeply, and some have got a very outstanding perspective. So you get all the different abilities and skills you can draw on from your collaborators, and you learn enormous amount from each of them. So the collaboration, without a doubt, it greatly enhances the research experience.
Oh, thank you for that. I'll leave it open to Prof. Ariati and Prof. Ratebe, if you would like
to. Prof. Ennis is spot on,
Yeah.
I think my advice would be, is to be strategic in choosing collaborations, to seek partnerships that align with your research interests and values, and ensuring mutual respect and shared goals. Those are very, very key. There's also no effective communication in terms of clarity in roles, expectations, and openness to feedback are key in maintaining productive collaborations. I've collaborated with a number of scholars in Italy, and we have enshrined these particular values. And these young scholars should not be afraid to reach out. Many academics out there open to collaborations and networking at conferences or through research groups, and that can lead to most valuable opportunities.
Thank you, Prof. Ratebe. Prof. Ariati, if we could.
Oh yes. Sorry. Collaboration is critical. Obviously, it's something that we can't do without it. When I started out many years ago, it was awfully difficult to forge collaborations overseas. This was before the time of computers, and overseas telephone calls were expensive and so forth. So your collaborations probably were intra-institutional and possibly with colleagues in other universities in South Africa, in my case. So very difficult to do. And one had to remember that, you were getting your information, as was mentioned earlier on in discussion today. You were getting that information from journals. You had to visit the library and read the journals. You didn't have instant access to papers like you can go to PubMed and do the searches that we do today in our topic and so forth. So it was difficult to collaborate. And in order to publish meaningful work that was of the quality required to gain access into good journals, you had to come up with original thinking, and that was the only way to compete in biochemistry in those days. Because if you had an idea here, there was a good chance that someone else would have had it somewhere else, and if they were in a first world country with all their resources and facilities available, they would reach a conclusion, a publishable conclusion, far sooner than you would. So you had to compete by being original in thinking, and that was very difficult. Times changed, and we were able to start engaging in international collaboration, and I think that is the way to keep abreast of your field. I'll give you one anecdotal story. In 1979, I was working in Detroit in the Michigan Cancer Foundation laboratory. And I was in the biochemistry lab. And at the end of the day, I required a chemical that wasn't available in the laboratory. And it was a Sigma chemical, and Sigma was centered in St. Louis in Missouri. So I went to my lab boss and I said, "Look, Dr. Zimlichka, I need this for the experiment." He made a note of it. I came back the next morning, and before I could put my lab coat on, that chemical was on my desk. It had been couriered from St. Louis, Missouri, overnight. Now, take that situation and bring it to South Africa or Southern Africa as it was in those years. If I required a chemical then to make progress in my project, I would send in a requisition. It would be ordered. By the time that chemical appeared in my lab, several weeks would have passed by. I would have lost several weeks of advantage. So from a practical point of view, it was obvious that really collaborative links with overseas laboratories who are better resourced than we were. And by better resourced, I mean they had access to equipment and facilities that we don't have. And I do want to emphasize that to the young listeners here is that our ideas are every bit as good as the ideas that are generated elsewhere in the world. So we've got to get over that. We've got good ideas. It's what we do with them and how we're able to capitalize on those ideas and bring them to fruition that is a problem. That's where we have to become more competitive. And collaboration is definitely one of the answers in that regard. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that, Prof. And for the bit at the end as well too, no, thank you. It's quite a bit to think about. So we're moving on. I think we're approaching towards the end of this discussion. So once again, I'd like to urge any members of the audience, if you have any questions, this is your opportunity to interact with the members of the panel. And if there's any burning questions, please feel free to either raise your hand or once again, you can type your message into the chat box. So while I give you some time to do that, I think we can move on to the last 2 points. And I think these are quite interesting in that it'll be good to get different perspectives on the future of higher education. And I think this is especially within the context of today. I mean, we've made mention of e-learning and distance learning and some of the changes in academia and the academic environment over the past few years. So in terms of the future of higher education, looking ahead, what changes or reforms do you think are necessary to ensure that future generations of scholars are well equipped to meet the evolving demands of academia in the broader world? It's quite a lengthy question, but I will leave it open to the panel, whoever would like to tackle this first. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. I think it's such a complex one. The future of education will be shaped by technological advancements, interdisciplinary research, and shifting societal needs. And that I think that is very important. Shifting societal needs. Now, to ensure that the future scholars are well equipped, several key reforms are necessary. The first one is that universities must integrate more flexible and technology-driven learning models, such as hybrid and online education, to make higher education more accessible. That's the first one. Secondly, there should be a strong emphasis on interdisciplinary collaboration to prepare scholars to tackle more complex global challenges than that requires diverse expertise. Academia must move beyond traditional metrics of success, such as publication counting and counting of units, and prioritize real-world impacts, innovation, and public engagement. Mental health support, work-life balance initiatives should also be strengthened to ensure that scholars thrive in their career without any kind of burnout. Because we're experiencing immense kind of burnout. And I think finally, mentorship and academic development programs should be widely expanded to help early, emerging scholars to navigate the complexity of funding, publishing, and the entire academic culture. Adaptability and inclusivity will be the key in shaping a resilient and forward-thinking academic landscape. Thank you, Dave. That's my addition.
Thank you, Prof. I think you raised a very important point there, and often, like when I think about collaboration, I often think about members in a similar field to me, but I think you raised an important point about collaborating across discipline where possible, because I think many of the global issues that we face currently cannot be often resolved by just a single discipline. So if I try and put it into context, if I look at some of my own work, if it's ever, this field is ever, to be taken up further in terms of cancer therapy, ideally, you would have members from chemistry, which will be organic and inorganic, as well as your biochemist who will, so that's actually a very interesting point. So thank you for bringing that up. It's something that, has something to think about. So thank you, Prof. Prof. Henning, if I can bring you into this question on point number 7.
Yes, it is a very challenging one of the future of higher education. I think if I could turn the clock back, I would have done things a little differently, because we in South Africa follow what's called the British system, which is when you do the PhD, it's just research. The American system does 3 or 3.5 years of intense coursework, a good foundation, and then they do like a 6-month research project. And they both got advantages, but I think in our system, I probably should have done some courses that are for younger academics. For example, programming. I did a little course in programming, but I should have done much more. So I think there's some courses that, if looking to the future, I should have done. Like nowadays, it's data science. It's all these topics that weren't big topics when I was younger. So I think you do need a more general. Let me just switch off. Sorry, hold on a sec.
No problem.
Yeah, so you do need, I think, with the future of academics of higher education, you probably need some courses that normally you wouldn't be interested in, but I think you've got to do it. I mean, I can get by without that very advanced programming. You've got this Wolfram Alpha. I can do all the programming I need, and I've got colleagues that do it. But I think that's a gap for me. And also, as far as the future of higher education, I'm a little bit biased. I think you've still got to have fundamental research, what we call blue sky research, because the fundamental research, it extends knowledge. You don't know the impact till maybe 40, 60 years later. So I think even though there's global problems and the research is directed that way, I think you still need, for higher education, some fundamental blue sky research that can advance knowledge. I think that's part of the higher education as well, that we don't want to completely neglect. It can't just be for IT and etc.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Prof. Prof. Ariati, if I can get your thoughts
Oh,
on this.
Thank you.
well.
I think both Prof. Ratebi and Prof. Henning have made excellent points and they've pretty much covered everything. I just wanted to pick up on a point that Prof. Henning raised about computing and programming. And yeah, I wish I had pursued that avenue, my career as well. I remember as an undergraduate, we had to attend a computer programming course that lasted 3 weeks. It was compulsory. And in those days, this computer was, there was a computer room, and the computer room had shelving all around it, and it had instruments which looked like the backs of old valve radios with all these valves glowing. And in the middle of the room was this telex machine keyboard. And when you struck a key, it made a loud clacking sound. So if you made an error, it was a loud clacking error. It was the IBM 1620. And I since discovered that the computing power of that computing room, I don't think was enough to land a little vehicle on Mars. A lot has changed, but yeah, and then we had to learn Fortran in those days. I wish I could be able to program. It would be enormously helpful because computing has become extremely important in biochemistry. As we look at molecules and complex molecules in 3 dimensions, and we want them to undergo dynamic changes in real time, and we want to see how we can dock potential molecules of interest into active sites and so on. Computing is extremely important. I would love to have been able to do that earlier on in my career. Trying to think of another point that was raised by Prof. Ratevi. Slipped my mind. Sorry.
Prof. Whenever it pops back, you can always feel free to rejoin in. It happens to all of us.
Yes, it happens more and more with me as I get older.
Thank you, Prof. If I think we're coming to the last question, and something which we thought would be very interesting to add, just to get a bit of perspective. And yeah, so the last section we'd like to discuss in this panel. Oh, sorry, before I continue, I see that there is a hand up from Tembisile, Dr. Tembisile. My apologies.
Thank you so much, Chair. No problem.
Yeah.
For me, titles are not a big deal that much.
Thank
We are
you.
all colleagues, so I'm okay with that. Thank you. Thank you so much to the panelists. It's really been an insightful session, and I think the biggest question for me comes with, or rather concern, is being an academic has become very much corporatized, for lack of a better word, because now, there's teaching and there's research. But now one is expected to be a great teacher, one is expected to be a great researcher. And going back to what Prof was saying, that we've now come to play the game of counting units instead of actually looking at how impactful the research that we're doing is. And I think maybe one thing that we need to look back on is how did we get here? Maybe if we can address that, and maybe I'd appreciate some comments here as well. How did we get to a point where a teacher is expected to be a researcher? Which leads back to, do I then have to be a great swimmer, but at the same time be a great climber. And I think even when we are now rated or whatever in terms of KPIs one is expected to be an all-rounder and a jack of all trades, but then you end up being a master of none. That's just a concern that I have in terms of going into the future, because that's actually the current trend that's happening. One gets recognition only when those things are fulfilled, and not necessarily when one plays to their strengths. And so we tend to forget a little bit about engaged scholarship, as Prof has said. But yeah, that's just a concern from my side. Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Doc. We'll leave it open to the panel. Anyone would like to respond, please feel free and go ahead.
Yes, I think it's a thorny one. It is a thorny issue. On a personal note, I remember my very first publication, and it was such an amazing experience that I flew with the gods for weeks and weeks after that. It was an achievement, a true achievement for me. And I look back on it now and I still get tingles. Now I see my colleagues publishing 20, 30 papers a year or more. And, it's something that one would never have been able to do back in those days. And it troubles me that the system almost requires the academic to do this. A numerical value is given to research output, and it's applied, as I said earlier, across campus. And it's awfully difficult to apply the same norm to completely unrelated disciplines. Also, there seems to be a growing divide between the boiler room and the helm of the ship. And this I find regrettable. It doesn't help the cause of the academic when there is this apparent divide and lack of communication, and where the expectations of the boiler room and the helm are somewhat different, and they don't converge. They diverge, as it seems, more and more as we go on. It is unfortunate. It is unfortunate. And the previous speaker mentioned the word corporate, and I think they've got it right. It does feel more and more like we're part of a corporation rather than a university. But you have to remember, I've been out of the mainstream for 15 years. And so these are observations I'm making from the backwaters in my little dinghy amongst the reeds and looking at the mainstream and what's happening out there. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Ariati. Prof. Henning or Prof. Ratebe, would either of you like to respond or have anything to contribute?
I don't have much more to contribute there, but I think it depends on the university you're at. I mean, if I look at overseas universities like Princeton, Oxford, Cambridge, they don't have this expectation of all these units. I mean, I think at Princeton, which is the top in mathematics in the world, the median publication rate a year is a half a paper a year per academic. But they produce the most magnificent papers, the big breakthroughs. But there's no pressure there. They're sort of left alone. But unfortunately, at our universities in South Africa, there is tremendous pressure. So, I mean, I can't just focus entirely on a 10, 20-year-old problem, but you can. I mean, when I look at, for example, field medal, which is like a Nobel Prize, but in mathematics, there's no Nobel Prize. So it's the equivalent. But I look at some of these candidates or some of the recipients, they have like 10 publications, but they've got these big breakthroughs. So I think it's not general internationally that you've always got to just churn out all these publications. I think some of the top universities, they don't have any constraints like that at all, and they get the results. They're getting these incredibly significant publication. But unfortunately, I think in South Africa, we are a little bit stuck with it. We have to publish because the university gets money from research publications, from units, and that is a huge source of income for the universities in South Africa. That's not the case at, I think, overseas universities. So we do have that pressure. And at university, there are different pressures. I mean, a colleague of mine, he went to America, brilliant researcher, managing top journals, outstanding teacher, a lot of PhD students. They wouldn't promote him to professor. And I said, this is crazy. I mean, you've got hundreds of papers. And his reason was he had to bring in a certain amount of funding every year. So,
Yeah.
so some universities have this incredible pressure of bringing in funding. And so it all depends on the universities you're at. So there's not, one shoe fits all, but I think in South Africa, there is unfortunately pressure on publishing units. So that's why I say, have on the side your big problems you're working on. Have the medium-sized ones and have the so-called ones that a problem that maybe takes 40, 50 hours, you can get something out of it. Have those problems. The problems that need thousands of hours, keep those on the side, work on them, but don't rely entirely on them. Unless you're at Princeton or one of these top universities, we've unfortunately got to juggle the problems we work on. So it is a huge challenge, I think, with juggling everything.
Thank you, Prof. Prof. Ratebe, I'll give you an opportunity if you'd like to respond.
Sorry, I'm unable to respond on this one. I can't be a referee player because I work for an institution that is heavily driven by units,
Yeah.
So I'll let this one pass. Yeah.
No problem, Prof. So I think that brings us to the last point of discussion, which would be some of the personal reflections on mentoring. So we go through the panel in any order, whoever would like to go first. In terms of, could you share a memorable mentoring experience from your career? What lessons did you learn, and how has that experience influenced your approach to mentoring others? One would like to go forward, or I can make a suggestion.
I mean, one of my the most memorable mentoring experience involved, guiding a PhD student at a very, early stages. Who was overwhelmed by pressure of publishing. It's one of the requirements, of course, to obtain, to fulfill the qualification requirements, and also to meet some of the objectives of the grants that were obtained at the time. So the student had a very strong ideas around how we should tackle this particular project, but he lacked confidence and direction. Instead of focusing only on outputs, I helped him to break down the goals into small manageable chunks, emphasizing process over immediate results. I think that was very key, emphasizing process over immediate results. Through regular discussions, constructive feedback, and encouragement, he gained confidence. He refined the research objectives and focus to meet the funder's objective, and successfully, at the end of that particular journey, he published his first major paper in a Quantal One journal. So this experience, reinforced the importance of patience, the active listening, and a tailored mentorship. And I learned that mentoring isn't just about imparting knowledge; it's about empowering, young scholars to believe in their abilities and navigate challenges independently. And since then, I've prioritized, mentorship that is both supportive and strategic to help my mentees and students to develop resilience, because academia requires resilience, critical thinking, because it also shapes how we do certain things, as well as, self-efficacy. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Ratebe. I think, Prof. Henning, if we get some of your personal reflections on mentoring, some of the interactions we had,
I think a lot of our students or collaborators are all very different. And I remember I think the top PhD student I ever had, he was absolutely magnificent, but he was not a normal sort of guy. So he'd work, midnight till 4 a.m, and most of the emails I got from him were 3 a.m. in the morning, which of course I wouldn't read then. But then I learned I couldn't phone him at 3 p.m. in the afternoon because he'd be sleeping. So you've got to adjust to the students, but this guy produced the most amazing work between midnight and 4 in the morning every day. So I love that experience with him.
Yeah.
For me, my best reflections of when I was mentored was that 3 to 4 hours every week, where my supervisor and myself would go to a room, we'd close the door, we'd work on the board together, and we'd just for 3 4 hours just excitedly work on these problems. We did it for 3 or 4 years, and that was for me a fantastic experience. Just that weekly 4-hour meetings we had just on the board, no distractions, we could get into it. So I think those were some of the great experiences I had. You've got to also keep your head on. I mean, I remember last year I went to a conference in Slovenia and I arrived a day early. I worked with a colleague from, it was Saturday, 8 in the morning, and it got to 8 p.m. at night, and we were in this building, and when we wanted to leave, we were locked out. The lifts didn't work, nothing worked. We were locked out of the building on the 4th floor.
Yeah.
So I think even when you're mentoring, you've just got to keep alert, just be sensible, don't get locked into a building or anything like that. But I think all these experiences are wonderful. Just the research, you get so engrossed in it, and it's very exciting when you do make the breakthroughs.
Thank you, Prof. Henning. And Prof. Ariasi, we'd like to get your thoughts on some personal reflections on mentoring.
Well, perhaps I could start by saying I was extremely fortunate in that I had a very good mentor. I was very fortunate. He was the doyen of biochemistry in this country, and he taught me how to think about the problem at the molecular level. In biochemistry, I feel that too many students come into the topic not seeing or understanding the problem down at the molecular level. If you don't understand what's happening down there, you can't ask the right sort of questions, and you cannot therefore interpret your results properly. So he did teach me to think deeply, and he also taught me to read, as I said earlier, outside of my topic. And he said, Mario, it's just amazing the ideas that I've picked up in reading unrelated papers and taken those ideas and applied them to what I was doing, and bang, it happened. It worked. So, but again, it's you don't have the luxury these days of the time to be able to read outside of your topic. It's just so demanding. I see my colleagues in the discipline here, and they're under enormous pressure, time pressure. That's why I came back to that quip about the MBA and time management. It really is like that. It's corporate work. It really has changed enormously. The landscape is nothing like the landscape that I recognize from that I grew up in my youth. It's totally different. So how does that affected me as a mentor? I try to instill the same principles into the students that have been left in my care. I've tried to show them the beauty of understanding these things at the molecular level and trying to demystify, and also to remove any fear of thinking down there, as it were, or in nano terms. As you know, our topic it involves nanotechnology. So is to try and remove the fear, the innate fear of things you don't really understand or you can't see. They're not visible, and to rely on your intellect and to build up your intellect and to try and give them the right sort of tools and background to enable them to do this. In other words, to empower them to ask the right question. I come back to that, I think, is a very, very important point, is to try and get these youngsters to pose the right question. So important. If you don't ask deep questions, and if you don't ask questions that are informed by what is happening at the cutting edge in your topic, then really I fear we may be losing. So I try to show them the love and the excitement that I feel when I discuss the topic or I talk about the topic, and I try and instill that into my students. And I'm not sure that I've succeeded in all the cases, but in one or two cases, I think it's worked. But yes, a lot of one-on-one time at the blackboard or the whiteboard these days, very important, and encouraging the students to ask the questions. And it was made, this point was made earlier by Prof. Henning. It doesn't matter if the question is inappropriate or perhaps uninformed. It doesn't matter. The important thing is to ask the question and get a feedback which is respectful and constructive. That's the way that the youngster is going to grow. They're going to be able to then have more confidence and ask more insightful questions, be it in their research, be it at a conference, be it at a gathering. And that's what I tried to do, is to show them the enthusiasm that I have had for my topic. And I've been blessed, I really have, because I've been able to pursue a love for this discipline. And I have to tell you, and the youngsters out there listening, that I was only introduced to biochemistry in my second year of university. I had enrolled to do maths, physics, and chemistry with the University College of London. And in the second year, at the end of the first year, I went to an introductory talk given by a professor of biochemistry, and it seemed so interesting. I had to pursue it. And biochemistry was a 2-year major, so you only embarked in biochemistry in the second year and majored in the third year. So I ended up with a chemistry biochem double major, and quite by chance, I found that was my niche, and I've been able to pursue that, and I've been blessed, and I've tried to impart that enthusiasm to youngsters. You have to, I mean, you've got to love what you do, because you're going to be doing it for a long time. There you go.
Thank you very much, Prof. And I can say from my own personal experience, I know I've done very minimal work with you, but the time that I actually did get to sit in your office and discuss topics, or even, we come to work in the lab and tackling the issue of the quantum dots, which are unfortunately were not successful. But I think you do impart, and you have imparted a lot to many of us, especially from the biochemistry department at UKZN. So I just want to say thank you for that. And, thank you once again to all members of the panel for your contributions. I think for me, it's been absolutely incredible hearing the insights that each of you have brought, especially from your fields and your experience. So I'd like to really thank you for that. We'd like to leave at least a minute to the audience. I know we've been going for a little while, so I'd leave about 30 seconds. If anyone would like to ask a question, or please feel free to raise your hand or pop a question in the chat box. Then the panel can address it. In the meantime, I'd just like to highlight to the members of the audience, if you could please go to the chat, and you will see that there's a feedback survey link which has been posted. If you can please fill out the feedback survey, it will be greatly appreciated. Like we said previously, this just helps us to get feedback on the session, what worked, what may not have worked, areas for improvement. We are obviously always looking to improve every aspect of what we do. And yeah, we hope to hear from you all. So I don't see any questions. I'd leave it to say, are there any final thoughts from any members of the panel? Oh, see, there's a hand. Actually, before we go to that, there's a hand from, I think, Dr. Carmen. Please feel free to unmute and go ahead.
I'd just like to appreciate the professors as well as the research hub for organizing this informative session. It helps to know that a person is not alone, and I think finding balance in academia is something that's a bit crazy, especially as an emerging scholar. But thank you so much for sharing the insightful information.
Thank you for that, Dr. Kams, those kind words for the panelists. Yeah, so again, I'd like to leave the floor open for any final thoughts from the members of our panel. Please feel free to share any thoughts you may have, and thereafter, I think we can close the session.
Well, may I just kick off by, I'd like to thank you very much for inviting me to join this discussion and to be in the company of illustrious professors such as Professor Henning and Professor Ratevi. And thank you very much for having the old man sit here and make some input into this discussion. I find it very difficult to make recommendations for what is to lie ahead, because so much of what we're living now was the matter of science fiction a little over 10 years ago. So it's awfully difficult to project what should be done for the future. But clearly we have to become competent and conversant and very functional at computing, AI. We have to be able to do all the electronic work. It's very, very difficult not to make progress without embracing, and I mean the word embracing, the technology as it evolves and make it useful to us.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Prof. Ariasi. Prof. Ratebe, is there anything, or Prof. Henning? I don't want to put you on the spot more than I already have. Please feel free.
Thanks a lot, David. I think thanks for the invitation, first to start with, and secondly, beyond my contribution, I think I've also learned from both old professors here with their experience, and this would definitely shape my thoughts around my mentorship skills, my thoughts around how to engage with upcoming scholars, and also how, as a person, grow further within my career. Thanks a lot. I've learned quite a lot from them, and thanks for the opportunity to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Ratebe. Prof. Henning, I think we could end with you.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity. I've so enjoyed the discussion with my colleagues, and I've learned a lot from them. But thank you for the opportunity that we can just air some of our views, even though we're from very diverse backgrounds. But thank you for organizing and arranging this. Much appreciated.
Actually, we would like to thank all of the panelists, because we understand that your schedules are very busy, and we were very excited when we've got the emails confirming your attendance. So we'd like to actually extend a thank you to you. So in closing, if I can just say, we'd like to firstly express our appreciation to the members of the audience for participating, for the chats, and for also bringing up points of discussion. And especially, again, we'd like to thank the panelists for all of your hard work and your making the time to actually consult with the audience today, with many of which is actually made up of emerging academics. I know there are some senior members also present as well. So thank you very much. We really appreciate your efforts. We appreciate your insights, and there's been some real gems that I myself personally I've made note of, and I will be implementing that moving forward in my journey in academia. So thank you, genuinely. The RC unit gives its thanks to all participants, and I hope for the members of the audience that we will see you again at future panel discussions and future workshops. Please remember to check out our RCDMS website, which can be accessed via Ulink, and that will give you a view of workshops we have at least 2 months in advance. So that gives you ample time to plan your diaries around any topics that you would like to attend to. So with that, I think we can close the session. Thank you once again for the engaging conversation, and we hope to see you all soon in future workshops. So thank you all, colleagues. Have a wonderful day. Cheers. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. David.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you.
Thank you.